Programming Throwdown, episode 63, Spring. Take it away, Patrick.
Wanted to talk about a sort of weird, tangent, interesting phenomenon, and that is very small quadcopters with cameras on them. So growing up as a child, the, very tiny spy airplane, spy helicopter, spy robot thing was always like a fascinating thought for a young child. And
in general, they had, remember Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, when the kids got really small, and then they were kind of like, flies on the wall size.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so now the technology for miniature electronics and cheap electronics is getting so good that it's sort of culminated in this thing that's just, I guess, some sort of phenomenon or whatever, but it's called the tiny whoop. So the tiny whoop is a small ducted fan quadcopter. So so a quadcopter has 4 propellers on motors arranged in sort of a square around the center, or an X, but around the center where the electronics and battery go. And the ducted part means there's like a sort of a, what would you call it, like a barrel, a small ring around the propeller,
right,
that helps make it more efficient, but also means that if you like sort of run into something, the propellers don't stall out and get caught. You can kind of bump into things, no big deal.
Yep.
And so this thing being so small and ducted means you can fly it around inside, and it's sort of perfectly fine. It's light enough that it isn't really going to damage much. I mean, you should still be careful, but it's not dangerous like the kind of Mavic Pros, like you see people flying around, the big outdoor quadcopters. You probably can't fly this outdoors because the wind is too big. Anyway, so it's a small ducted fan thing, and then someone put a really tiny camera on it so that it broadcasts to, if you have first-person view goggles, which are basically goggles with like little TV screens in them, sort of like virtual reality screens, only there's not normally 3D information.
Got it.
And so you're able to sort of fly from a first person's perspective, this tiny little thing, and fly it around your house. And so if you sort of watch the videos on the website or just go to YouTube and type it in, there's been new variants where they use other base quadcopter models to make the same thing, but this sort of original tiny whoop is based off of a specific model, and like it's kind of a specific setup, but the idea has kind of caught on, these tiny little quadcopters that you fly around the house and, sort of make a racetrack out of your dining room chairs or whatever.
That sounds
it may be.
amazing. Wait, how much does this cost?
So I think that this setup, which is the official quote unquote tiny whoop setup, is about like $175 for the kind of quadcopter, but then you need the goggles and a transmitter. But the goggles and transmitters are like useful for more than just this setup. Like you could use them for other stuff.
Gotcha.
So that entry price is pretty high. They have like sort of knockout versions. So I think you can get it all in for probably under $100 if you do the kind of, not the kind of name brand stuff.
Right.
And it's still a little pricey. Like I don't, to be fair, have one. But just like, I'm fascinated by this. It seems like it's almost within reach for this like childhood dream of mine to be able to kind of like play a real life video game, right?
Yeah, it
like,
sounds totally awesome.
Basically.
Did you see the racing, the quadcopter racing? It's the same.
Yes.
It's exactly what you described. They have the goggles, but these ones are much bigger, and they have this crazy obstacle course that they've built beforehand, and they have to race through this obstacle course like wearing these VR goggles. It looks awesome.
Yeah. So this is basically like for me playing Pilot Wings on the Super Nintendo.
Yeah, right.
Like this is that in like real life.
That sounds amazing. Yeah, we should. We should totally like split one, or like get like a pool of people together, because it's probably like all together around $300.
Yeah.
But maybe if we get, we won't use it that much. You'll get tired of it eventually.
Yeah, that's right. That's the thing is like, I mean, if you're really into it, you probably, but for me, it's just like, I just want to play around with it for a little bit. It's probably fun. So I did get a chance to try the DJI Mavic Pro, which is sort of like the newest and greatest outdoor kind of quadcopter with camera that a lot of people are really excited about. It's about $1,000.
Oh, wow.
And it collapses down, folds down into something that could fit in a large pocket, like think a cargo pants pocket.
Okay.
And it hooks up to your phone really nice. And I'll say, I was surprised. That is a very, very well put. I mean, $1,000 is expensive, but is a very, very well put together kind of setup. The quality of the quadcopter, the kind of how the interface is thought out with using your phone as part of the controller, the quality of the video, and they have a gimbal on it to make the video really stable. And they have sort of cameras and I think ultrasound sensors, or maybe just cameras to sort of look at the ground and sort of do stabilization. So they sort of can fly to GPS points and do altitude hold, but then at low levels, they also do a lot of sort of computer vision to stabilize the quadcopter very accurately at low levels. And so they have even like what they call like a tripod mode, where you sort of fly it up and it almost acts as if it's a camera mounted on a tripod, just filming whatever you're kind of pointed at.
Wow,
it's amazing. Really slick. So if you're interested, you can go check out the videos. I think they even, I don't know if sold out is the right word, but I think there was like, it's been hard to get one. They've been so popular. Yeah. And I don't know, I can really justify, because if you went hiking amazing places that had clearance to fly these, they'd make for awesome videos. I don't go enough interesting places to want to record video of where I go from a drone or from anything, to be fair. But it definitely
that would be cool while you're hiking, to get like really cool aerial shots of you hiking and stuff. But $1,000 is pretty steep.
Yeah,
I mean, it'd be great if you could rent one.
The fact that they're becoming down to the price where it's an individual could own it, not like a video company or a group of people, it's kind of crazy. So I look forward to the future when, hopefully these things continue to get better and drop in price, and everybody walks around with little flying drones over their head recording everything.
Oh, great.
But anyway, so Tiny Whoop, that's my like something of nostalgia sort of triggered when I saw this, and I was like, ooh, I really want to play with one of those. So check it out.
Awesome.
Let us know if you end up getting one or playing with that, because it sounds awesome.
I just realized if anyone ever even says the word Pilot Wings, I have to play it now. Like, pretty much the rest of my night has been decided.
I was trying to teach my kid how to play it, but they're still too young. It didn't really work out very well.
Pilot Wings is a tough one.
Yeah.
So even Mario is tough, at that age.
A lot of games are actually tougher than I remember. I had way more time when I was a kid than I do now.
Yeah, exactly. Cool.
So time for the news. My first link was a tutorial on writing a graphics shader. So I think a while ago, I had either as my tool of the show or something, I had Shader Toy, which is a website where it uses WebGL and allows you to sort of write your own shader to kind of play cool animations or do some effects. And we talked about it briefly. Anyway, so this link we have is a tutorial for how to get started writing your own shader and it uses Shader Toy as an example and sort of walks through the explanation of what shaders are and what they do and how they work. It also serves as sort of an intro in some levels to kind of graphics programming. And I just thought it was a really well put together tutorial. I haven't had a chance to sort of follow all the way through, but I sort of skimmed it and saw the approach they were taking. And I'm actually excited I want to kind of try this out, because low-level graphics programming is not the best place to spend your time if you want to write a game, but it always seems like a very interesting aspect of doing that. Yeah,
totally. Yeah, I mean, super fun. It's like parallel processing, linear algebra. It's like touches a lot of like things that are really, really fun to work on. Yeah,
and it's a lot of when you learn about these things, you'll sort of recognize them when you play games often, like, they're doing this or doing that. So anyways, we'll have the link in the show notes. I'm not gonna. It's like a very long link, so I'm not. Yeah,
check it out if you're interested in it at all. And I think it's cool. It's visual, and a lot of these things kind of walk you through kind of the whole process, which is really cool. Check it out. So my news is a pretty cool thing. It's some folks at Microsoft building an underwater data center, and these guys literally did this. They have these huge pipes, and each pipe has a rack, inscribed in the pipe, and with all the wires, switches, and everything. And then they have a huge high bandwidth cable coming out of the data center, right? So you can get the information out. But the whole thing's underwater. So as a result, they don't need any cooling or anything like that. It's super interesting. Tons of pictures of the whole process. They actually, I guess because of the heat and just being a surface on the water, it grew a lot of organisms on the data center. So there's just a lot of sea creatures living on the surface of the data center, which is fine. But they talk about how they get the electricity in and stuff like that. It's a really, really cool article. Give it a read if you have some time.
No, I'm distracted. I want to envision where are other interesting places you can put data centers.
Oh, I mean, I think underwater is the best because
So like putting it in a
water's
volcano,
ubiquitous.
I guess you could use like the thermal heat to make your power.
Oh yeah, you could, but now
But
cooling it
then
would
now,
be
yeah, now
tough.
cooling's a
Yeah.
problem. Yeah.
I mean, they do a lot in places that have waterways. Like they basically build a dam. It's a dam and a data
Mm.
center all in one. Um, but yeah, There's some kind of in the desert area, and they're all run by solar farms.
Oh. Yeah, normally
Um,
where cheap
yeah,
electricity is.
yeah, exactly.
So if you have a data center, a cluster of many computers, and you wanted to do some machine learning on it, you could use TensorFlow 1.0, which just came
That's
out.
right.
That
Pretty
was my
cool.
bad attempt at a segue. So TensorFlow announced that they're hit their 1.0 milestone. There's a lot of sort of low-level things that I guess they improved, and I'm not a TensorFlow developer, but the one that caught my attention here is they're sort of feeling that their Python API has become stable, which
Good.
means that for re- features for releases going forward, they don't feel like it's going to change dramatically, which means you can kind of depend on it being close to what it is today, and that every time they change it, you're not going to have to go update a whole bunch of code.
Right. Yeah, very cool. Yeah, TensorFlow is great. Um, I highly recommend it. I think, I've used R, I've used MATLAB, but going to NumPy for me was great because there's a lot of like file I/O and different format handling and all these things that are really a pain to do in MATLAB or R. Like you end up having to do them in C or anyways. Versus Python has support for everything. So I used NumPy for a while and Theano and all that, and TensorFlow is just a cut above all of that. So it's really good to see that it's stable and it doesn't sound like it's going away anytime soon. So my article is why are Indian engineers afraid of AI, afraid of artificial intelligence? And it's a super interesting article. I mean, it touches on a lot of different parts of Indian culture and things like that I knew nothing about until I read the article. One interesting thing that it really made me think about is apparently in India, but I feel like it's also true here in the US, there's a lot of pressure to be a manager. And so, if you have to spend all of this time and energy learning a specialty, like an individual special skill like AI, or if you want to be like a super expert in databases or just a super expert in graphics or something like that, that's time that you could be spending getting an MBA and like going the manager route. And so, this is true everywhere, but I guess particularly in India, it's just very hard to get people to specialize in these sort of individual kind of specialities for this reason. Everyone wants to get an MBA and be a manager. And I thought this was kind of interesting. Like, I'd be interested to hear what you think about it as well, Patrick. But like, I think, a lot of companies here in Silicon Valley do a pretty good job of making sure that there isn't like a economic or a game theoretic incentive to being a manager. That it's basically, you can be a manager, you could specialize, and they don't kind of set up the company so that one is just obviously better than the other. And so that helps, encourage more people to specialize. But I think in general, this is just a big problem. I mean, if you look at the CEO isn't an AI person most of the time. Most of the time, the CEO is someone who manages the people under them. And so there's this sort of implication that is sort of the way to the most fulfilling life. And it'll be interesting, especially, the demand for CS specialists in a variety of fields is extremely high. It'll be interesting to see sort of how we deal with this, as a society.
For AI in particular, I feel that the background you need, at least currently, to be able to kind of create AI solutions or, the sort of deep learning neural network, the stuff that's hot right now, you need background in a lot of things that take just a certain amount of time spent working on those things to get to that specialty. You can kind of work in the frameworks or hooking up bits of existing frameworks together, but kind of like actually from scratch figuring out a correct solution to the problem and making sure that the AI solution or the machine learning solution is actually appropriate for your problem. Like the kind of understanding for that seems to require relatively, compared to doing other stuff in computer science, investment in getting enough learning to be able to do that well.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And so I think the manager thing is an interesting twist on it, which is to say that you could spend all of that time becoming a manager instead, except that I think being a manager, people who, in my experience, has been people who are good at engineering don't always want to do the things that managers sort of need to do to be good managers.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I agree 100%.
So if you enjoy, sitting down at code and hacking on it and solving a problem and optimizing something and thinking through clever new solutions, I mean, that doesn't say you won't also enjoy problem solving, human conflict and negotiating deadlines and doing software estimation. But those two aren't as close as I think people often assume they might be. And so often you find engineers convert to being managers and become unhappy because they actually preferred doing what they were doing before. And I think sometimes, like you said, often companies try to set it up so that you don't have to do that. Like you don't have to become a manager to get a promotion, or at least in most of the engineering companies I've worked at, that hasn't been the case. You can still get promoted as a technical contributor. But it often seems that there's more competition for the technical contributor than, say, a manager. But I don't know if that's just perceived. And that, management is actually also very tough because, the buck sort of stops there. And if you mess it up, it's very easy to kind of not get fired, I don't think, but, just kind of not get the sort of credit or the compensation that you would want because you're seen as not performing.
Yep. Yeah, I think there are pros and cons to both. I feel pretty good about this issue. Like the issue being, in this particular article, people, everyone wanting to go into management. But I think, the trend is already kind of shifting the other way. Like there's a lot of people with MBAs and so I think the pros of, specializing even as an individual contributor are starting to really stand out. And so my guess is, this sort of like pressure to like climb the ladder by being a manager is going to get kind of less and less.
Yeah, we've never really talked about it, but I've always struggled to see that we haven't kind of come across a great, and I don't know, maybe other industries have it or don't have it, but there never seems to be a consensus on like what is a good team structure. So often you end up on a project that says, hey, we're trying to be very flat, essentially very large numbers of engineers to relatively few managers. But then there seems to be some pendulum that swings back the other way and says that's actually too difficult for the managers to sort of figure out what's going on. So then we need to organize the engineers into groups. And whether you like it or not, that sort of works away from flat and into sort of hierarchies and then back and forth. This is sort of way off topic of the article, but I just sort of have never heard or seen or found a company that is trying to grow and change. Maybe stable companies is different, but companies which are under growth and change and new projects and new work and that kind of stuff that have found a good balance of what a good team composition really looks like.
Yeah, I agree 100%. Super hard problem. I feel like there's progress. Like, I feel like things are better now in general when I hear anecdotes from people and things like that than, maybe 5 or 10 years ago. But yeah, it's still totally unsolved problem. All right, time for book of the show. My book of the show is The Divine Comedy, which is a very old book. It's written by Dante Alighieri, and it's about it's a fiction book about his journey into the center of Earth, which is hell. So in his book, he goes through all the different I can't remember, it's like the rings of hell. I think it's the rings of hell. He gets to hell, which is at the center of the earth. He actually passes through that. And I guess once you go through in the story, once you go through the center of the earth, you come up on you start to approach the surface from on the other end of the earth, right? And that's where purgatory is, and so on and so forth. And he explains all this. The reason why I'm reading this is just over the years, from everything from Game of Thrones with the giants to like NetHack and Dungeon Crawl, these games that literally have the demons and the fiends from Dante's The Divine Comedy in them, and it's just, you see the same kind of, it's kind of like reading Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Like, you see so many of these references to like Greek mythology and things like that are all contained in Dante's Inferno and other books, that I felt like I was going to kind of bite the bullet and read this sort of classic. It's pretty hard to read because the entire thing is a poem. It's written in like a poem format. So it's just pages and pages and pages of poems. So yeah, but I'm making my way through it. But one kind of cool thing I found out along the way is, and I remember hearing about this every now and then, but I never really looked into it, is Project Gutenberg, which is basically all of the public domain books that they can get their hands on, which I think they're up to like 53,000. They have curated in like electronic format, and it's very high quality. The photos are high quality. They have Mobi, EPUB, PDF, so they have all the right formats. And they had The Divine Comedy, and if you want to read a book like Alice in Wonderland or any of these books, 1984, any of these books that is in the public domain, you can get it from this website, and it's probably the best version you're going to get. So yeah, that's my book of the show.
Yeah, you weren't kidding about old. It was written in 1320.
Yeah. Now they have like different versions. Obviously, it's written in Italian. The version that I'm reading is actually relatively recent. Like, I think it's written in the past 50 years or so. But yeah, it's still like pretty hard to read.
My book is not old. It's actually quite new, and it's A Night Without Stars by Peter F. Hamilton. And this is, I've had several Peter Hamilton books on our 63 episodes. I'm sure I've had more than a few. And this is part of his Commonwealth saga, specifically the Fallers part of that. He has sort of what a trilogy and is it duology? I don't know, whatever, 2 books.
Maybe, yeah.
So I think in his Commonwealth saga, there's like a duology, a trilogy, and then this one is a duology. So there was a previous book, and then this is the second book, and this called Chronicle of the Fallers. The first one was Abyss Beyond Dreams. I don't know, these are just words. I have to look up.
The titles sound awesome.
Abyss Beyond Dreams, and this is Night Without Stars. Nice. And it's about the same. So it's the second book to this other one, and it kind of wraps up the series. And I guess I was reading, it sounds like he has sort of saying this is the last book in the whole Commonwealth saga. So if you've not read anything in Peter F. Hamilton's world, don't start here. This is sort of like very, very late / maybe even the end of the Commonwealth saga altogether. But the world he's sort of created in this sci-fi book, which they're really big books. So I think in total, like with all of the books, it's something that somebody said like 8,000 pages or something.
Oh wow.
5,300 pages, sorry. 5,300 pages in total. So it's, it's an investment, but he creates a world that deals with a lot of things that I find very interesting. So sort of what happens when a society goes post-scarcity, that, things are very different. Why do people do what they do when humans can augment their body with, technological enhancements? Some people want to, some people don't. Some people take it to an extreme. Some people, there sort of becomes a middle ground of how you modify your body. What happens if you can sort of, rejuvenate your body down to a younger age? So, aging becomes sort of optional. Like, what age would you sort of lock in at, and what age would you stay? And, if you wanted to kind of become a little bit of an older person, it almost becomes an eccentric affectation that, like, oh, that's a 45-year-old person. Like, wow, like, interesting. I wonder why they let themselves be 45 instead of staying at 20.
Oh, wow.
And there's a lot of interesting concepts. And then there's aliens as well, and how aliens can be so very different than humans, but also sometimes the same. And anyways, there's a lot of good stuff in his book, and it's really thought provoking. Whenever I finish one of his books, I always find myself like really excited to like invent something, or like I want the thing that he's describing in his book. I want to like go. I guess sort of Isaac Asimov or Arthur C. Clarke sort of did the same thing, right? They described satellites before satellites were a thing. They described space travel before we went into outer space. And people kind of, I could very much imagine feeling the same way. Now, me reading their books, I appreciate them. They're good books, but they don't inspire in the same way because they sort of describe something that has already been described by others and that we've also sort of entered into that future.
Right.
But this, I sort of feel maybe gives me the same feeling that people reading those had, 30 years ago, or I don't know the right number of years ago. But kind of reading about satellites before the first Sputnik went up, right, would have been just crazy. And so for this, I sort of reading about the stuff that it's like, well, I really hope one day people are inspired to go invent these things.
Yeah, it sounds awesome. Yeah, I wonder, wouldn't it be crazy? I mean, if they invented a way to slow, to slow aging, but they did it kind of so late that we're already like 60 or 70, I'd probably just, I don't know. It's a tough call. But yeah, that book sounds awesome. I'll totally read it. Once I'm done reading about hell, I'll read about
dear.
living
Well, don't go
forever.
read this one. Go back and read. I think the first one is Pandora's Box.
Oh, okay.
Pandora's Star.
Okay.
Sorry, Pandora's Star. Is I believe the first one in the comic saga. So
cool, and I will read them using Audible. I've started kind of getting into audiobooks. The biggest thing was like I find my eyes are hurting, and really it's because I think I'm on my phone too much. Like I used to be on the computer maybe 6-7 hours a day. And now I'm still on the computer 6-7 hours a day, but I'm on my phone maybe 4 hours a day. And it's just too much. I don't know if those numbers are totally accurate, but I realized that I'm just looking at screens way too much. And so I've started doing audiobooks. I've also started getting into drawing. I getting into pencil drawing with an actual pencil instead of using Photoshop. I think Audible is pretty awesome for being able to listen to the books and kind of just close your eyes and or if you're driving, don't close your eyes, but not crash into anybody. But be able to kind of give your eyes a break from the computer screen or the Kindle or what have you.
Yeah, I mean, I love it for my commute. So this book that I was just saying that I just finished, A Night Without Stars, is 26 and a half hours long. So, you could sit there and read a book like you said, but I'm already...
It's like 3 days of driving in the valley, right?
Yeah, I mean, I could tell you it's unfortunately not as long as I would wish it was to take to finish. Because I finish them more quickly. I'm always surprised at how fast I make it through a 40-hour book or a 25-hour book or a 20-hour book. And then when you get kind of 8-hour books, which are kind of normal novel size, it's just like, that doesn't even last a week. Anyways, but yeah, so listening to audiobooks is great to pass the time. If you commute on the bus or you drive or, spend any amount of time where you kind of, like Jason said, you either don't want to sit there staring at your phone for the length of time, or for me, like on a bus or train, like I get sort of sick looking at my phone. From the vibrations, then Audible's a great way to still sort of enjoy content, and of course podcasts. But Audible's a great way to enjoy books that you might otherwise not get a convenient opportunity to read.
That's right. We also check out Audible. You can go to audibletrial.com/programming throwdown, all one word, and we have a link to that in the show notes as well. And you could get started on your free trial. You can also support the show through Patreon. Patreon.com/programming throwdown. That really helps us out. It goes directly to, server costs, setting up the t-shirt stores, things like that. We actually use tons of terabytes of data a month. And so, the contributions help cover that. We also occasionally do raffles. A couple of lucky subscribers got a couple of t-shirts. I verified the t-shirts actually got there. So you know who you are. We called you out last show, and you should have your t-shirt. If by some crazy reason you don't, and someone else picked up your t-shirt, let me know. But that shouldn't happen.
All right. Well, time for Tool of the Show.
Tool of the show. This is a total cop-out. But I built my own tool and I want to talk about it.
I don't think that's a cop-out. I feel like that's like overachieving.
Maybe, yeah. So basically, I wanted a SSH like thing that lasted forever. It survived. Like if I'm always on the go. Like I'm on my laptop, but I'm SSH'd into a machine in a cluster where I do all of my work. I don't do any work on my actual laptop. All my work is done remotely. And so I'm SSH'd into that machine. And so, I'd close my laptop, I'd go to a meeting, I open my laptop, and the connection's dead. Or I close my laptop, go to on the shuttle, open my laptop, connection's dead. And I have to, you have to do this goofy thing with SSH, you do like tilde period to like kill the connection, even though, because it doesn't think it's dead. They have to go back into SSH, and they have to use screen, and it was just a huge pain. So I built this thing called Eternal Terminal. It's pretty cool. It takes a little bit of setup. I built a little website explaining how it works. You have to install something on your laptop or on your client. You have to install a piece of software on the server as well. And then it will actually use SSH to kind of start the connection. So you still have to have an SSH server, but most people do. It'll kind of negotiate the Eternal Terminal connection. And then after that, you're solid. So from kind of the user perspective, it's just replacing SSH with ET. So you do ET, you do the location of the server, and it will do everything else, handle all the negotiation, and then boom, you have a terminal, and it's just there forever. So if you open up your laptop, I actually closed my laptop. I had a terminal running top, which people don't know. Top is this Unix command that every second or two, it prints out the, state of the computer, like the processor usage and things like that. So I had top going inside of an Eternal Terminal. I closed my laptop. I opened it about 3 days later, and it actually like fast forwarded through all of the top. Like in other words, like all these numbers started flying by, and basically top was catching me up on the state of my machine, for all those seconds for the whole 3 days. But it fast forwarded all the way to the present, and then it just kept going. So I'm pretty happy with it. I'm still working on getting it like into Ubuntu and Debian and some of these, Linux OSs, like getting it built in, which is really interesting. I've never done that before. So in the meantime, you have to do a little bit of finagling to get it to work. You have to install an RPM from file and stuff like that. But yeah, it's coming along, and it does the job. And if you do a lot of SSH, check this out.
Well, after that overachieving bit of awesomeness, mine is simply a website, myminifactory.com. If you've heard of Thingiverse, this is sort of similar. It's a place for 3D models. So I have a 3D printer, and this website, I don't know, Thingiverse has sort of almost everything, but it's sort of hard to find the kind of best stuff. This is a little more selective in what they have. It has a little less, but it tends to kind of be more interesting on average, I guess. And so if you have a 3D printer or want to be inspired as to why you should want a 3D printer, then you should check out myminifactory.com. They have all sorts of weird smash-ups between different funny characters, like I'm looking at apparently a Bender head statue on top of a Buddha.
Nice.
Or something. Okay, I don't, yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Interesting. There's lots of sort of fan art for, lightsabers. Here's a magical fishing hook from Moana. Cool. Just all sorts of interesting trinkets. I don't know that they're particularly useful, but they're sort of fun. And if you like kind of using a 3D printer to print out things that are sort of unique that if you didn't have a 3D printer you probably wouldn't have, then this is a great site to go to.
So if you print a 3D toy for your kids,
yes.
Let's assume your kids are over the stage where they eat everything,
yes.
right? Like, is it safe? Like, if my son is like running and he falls with the toy, is it going to like splinter and like destroy him or something?
I'm not a lawyer. I will not give child safety advice.
This is not good point. Okay, for total disclaimer here, this is our opinion, and don't try.
I let my kids play with them. The PLA. So while you're printing, so my printer lives in the garage, and then I have webcam set up to monitor it, because there is some sort of. Sometimes when you're doing printing, there's sort of grinding gears on the plastic, and the plastic kind of gets into little bits of dust that float around in the air, and you wouldn't want to breathe that in.
Got it.
And depending on the kind of plastic you're printing. But the most common ones are ABS and PLA. And ABS is often used for like drinking water pipes. And PLA is used for the compostable plastic cups, if you ever see those. So it's like a corn, or it can be corn-based biodegradable thing. And so my kids don't put things in their mouth, so I'm not too worried about it. If they tripped and fell, they have little die-cast toys as well. This seems less bad than that.
That's true.
But I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a child safety expert. Your kids will probably die if you give them toys advice to play with.
if your kids have any fun, they might die. I had a chemistry set that actually had magnesium strips, and like you could make napalm and all this stuff. Like it had instructions for making napalm. And I got a chemistry set for my cousin's kid, and it was like nothing. Like everything was edible. Like you couldn't actually do anything. I think all you could do is make a volcano or something. It's like things have gotten so tame.
Yes.
Anyway,
I don't disagree, but I am not a lawyer. I will not recommend you teach your kids to make napalm.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, I should probably shut up. I should delete my browser history. So now we have a really cool interview, and so we're going to take it away. All right, hey everyone. So we're here with Spencer Gibb, who's a principal engineer at Spring Cloud, and Mark Heckler, who's a developer advocate for Pivotal. And we're going to talk all about kind of the Spring framework, which is something pretty cool. I've definitely used it in the past. A lot of people, if you're a Java developer, you've used it or you at least know about it. But now we have experts who can really tell us, kind of fill in all of the holes in our sort of Swiss cheese mental model of Spring. So kind of, Mark and Spencer, kind of just give a brief intro of yourselves, kind of what do you do at Pivotal, and what parts of the Spring framework you're most interested in.
Okay, well, I guess I will start. My name is Mark Heckler. I'm a developer advocate for Pivotal. Pivotal covers a lot of ground, and the two big things that Pivotal is probably known for, among many things, are the Spring Framework and the Spring portfolio of development products, as well as Pivotal Cloud Foundry. I do kind of deal with both of those, but I focus primarily on the Spring portfolio, and I get to go out and my background is in development, so I get to go out and talk to a lot of developers about what they're doing and how they can hopefully do it better with Spring.
My name is Spencer Gibb. I'm one of the leads on Spring Cloud. Spring Cloud is focused on eliminating some of the boilerplate that comes with distributed systems. Often you find yourself in that situation when you have a microservice architecture, and we try and eliminate some of the heartache and problems that come from that.
Cool, that makes sense. So when you say Spring Cloud, is this like interfacing with AWS, or is this more MapReduce Spark type computing?
Spring Cloud, the core of it deals with things like service discovery and configuration, distributed configuration, and circuit breakers and different things like that, regardless of which cloud infrastructure you run on.
Gotcha. Cool. Very cool. So if you had to give, I know Spring is just a massive framework. I've seen so many things come from Spring. Like one thing I used from Spring was a OAuth plugin where, you could, log in through Facebook, log in through Google. But, Spring does so many different things. If you had to sort of describe the Spring framework in a few sentences, kind of how could you do that? Well,
I'll take a first shot at this, and Spencer can fill in wherever I may leave a gap. the Spring Framework kind of started off as a way to fix a very bad situation with enterprise Java. And of course, it grew to provide a lot of capabilities. And then, of course, various different components or different parts of the overall puzzle came into being to solve different needs. So you have things like Spring Cloud, which covers an imperative model of cloud development. And you have things like the new Project Reactor, which covers the reactive space, and you have Spring Data and Spring Cloud OAuth and Spring Security and several other projects which were incubated. And if sufficient value is seen, if there's a lot of folks embrace that and see that as meeting a real need, of course, usually that's kind of folded into the overall project going forward or the portfolio going forward.
From my point of view, recently I've thought of Spring as it's a tool to eliminate boilerplate, eliminate those repetitive things you do over and over and over. I can't remember which person on the team said it, but when you use Spring, and in particular Spring Boot and Spring Cloud, it's like pair programming with the whole Spring team, right?
Nice.
They're part of your team, and you don't have to worry about all those things that they do. You get to focus on what James Waters calls the value line, right? Whatever your project does that is unique, rather than all this stuff that everybody does over and over and over.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I know just one of the first things that made me think about things along that lines when I found out about protocol buffers or Thrift or one of these, Avro or any of these sort of container frameworks. And I realized, I don't have to write 2,000 lines of code to take these Java objects and put them on the hard drive or send them to another computer. That they've just found some way where I can write, a couple of lines of code and protocol buffers will do so much work for me. And Spring is much the same way where, trust me, you don't want to learn about OAuth 2 and redirect URLs and tokens, and you don't want to have to deal with any of that. That I'm pretty sure that won't be, whoever's listening, that won't be core to your business. Your business is going to be about making a cool app or a website, providing some entertainment or some education to a broad set of people, not trying to understand tokens. And so using that element of the Spring framework can greatly help that. So how does Spring then relate to, say, Apache Commons? Right, Apache Commons is also sort of a large collection of libraries that kind of enable developers. So is Spring just like kind of a similar vehicle but more geared to enterprise, or kind of what are the differences there?
Well, I'll tag in first on this. I feel like a lot of the value that's the various Spring components bring to the mix is an opinionated approach. Sometimes you hear that, and a lot of times people will say, well, what does that really mean? The idea behind an opinionated approach is that rather than provide you a dozen different ways of doing something, what we try to do is provide a very clear-cut path with a kind of a path of least resistance to cover that 80 to 90% of use cases. So for the many, many things that we do that are very similar across the board, we want to make that very easy for you to do with a minimal amount of code. But in the old days, the bad old days of frameworks, typically you had one way to do things, and that was the framework way. And if you didn't do it the framework way, tough. You just couldn't get it done with that particular tool set. But with an opinionated approach, we want to solve that 80 to 90% use case very easily. And yet still, if you need to color outside those lines, we want to get out of your way and allow you to meet those needs as well. So when you talk about things like Apache Commons or other open source libraries, typically they'll either try to, and I'm kind of painting with a broad brush here, but they try to either provide a lot of different ways to do things or one way to do things. We try to provide that one way very easily and yet still provide you that escape hatch to let you do the other things fairly easily, but with a little more effort on your part.
And Spring Framework, at its core is a dependency injection framework, and then things have been added on, right? Like Spring MVC, which is the web framework, and things like you've talked about, like security, and there's also things like Spring Data and other things. And each one of those in and of itself could be of comparable size and complexity to something like Apache Commons. And there's some slides from Phil Webb, one of the leads of Spring Boot, which he paints a picture of Spring Framework. He puts up a picture of a bunch of ingredients for a cake, right? Eggs, flour, sugar, vanilla, all those different things. Spring Boot is a baked cake, right? Like Mark talked about, it will get you most of the way there. And projects like Spring Cloud, where Spring Boot focuses on an individual process, Spring Cloud kind of focuses on multiple processes and the coordination between those processes at a high level.
Cool, that makes sense. So typically when you think about Spring, you think about kind of web frameworks and web services, and that seems like that was a lot of the origin. It sounds like the origin was initially dependency injection, but when I found out about it, it had gotten into web, but now it sounds like it's going even kind of beyond web to a lot of other kind of typical use cases for Java engineers.
Yeah, there's beyond web things like Spring Data, where Spring has a template pattern that it uses that makes interfacing with different technologies simple. There's JDBC template and Rabbit template for interfacing with RabbitMQ, but there's also interfaces to different styles of databases, NoSQL key value stores, document stores. There are stream-related technologies, so interfacing with technologies like Kafka and, of course, RabbitMQ and Redis, and so it's becoming quite broad and useful in anywhere from large projects to small ones because of the ease of use of Spring Boot.
Cool, that makes sense. So there's Pivotal, which is the sort of company that is leading the charge on Spring. What are some other projects that Pivotal is really involved in right now?
Pivotal are, I guess, as a whole, huge contributors to Apache Tomcat. We also have several projects that we've either brought under our fold in terms of stewardship or have created ourselves, things like Redis, RabbitMQ, Greenplum. We also have contributed a lot of code and a lot of hours and time and commitment to Cloud Foundry. Cloud Foundry is run by a foundation. You have big players like IBM and HP and GE and CenturyLink and, of course, Pivotal, among many others, who have come together to create an open source cloud platform. Pivotal is one player in that, but a very strong player in that as well, again, with time and resources behind it. So that's kind of a smattering, but of course, Spring engineers, Pivotal engineers in general have their hands in a lot of things and contribute. It's the open source ethos is kind of, interwoven with the company and with all of us. So I think we all try to contribute where we can. Cool,
that makes sense. I think you kind of alluded to this, but who are sort of the big users of Spring? Like, who are sort of your heavy hitters who have, the most, the P90, right? The people who have the 10% most servers and users who are using the Spring framework.
I don't have a huge list of customers, but I can tell you some that I've visited that have publicly announced their use of Cloud Foundry and Spring as well. So I've personally visited Comcast and was just at Ford last week. So there are some really big companies that are using Spring and Cloud Foundry as well.
Yeah, I just off the top of my head, I can think of folks like Home Depot, Allstate, JPMC. I know I actually kind of went looking because you find the Spring framework and Spring Boot and various components that are in use in different places that you wouldn't necessarily hear a lot about, but they're just any place that has a need for a robust backend processing or a cloud capabilities in-house or on-premises or in public cloud, you typically see Spring employed in some capacity or another. And I kind of went through the did a little bit of behind-the-scenes searching and saw that most of your major players that you might imagine in Silicon Valley and throughout the country have used Spring in some capacity or other. So as far as the penetration among those different companies, I have no idea, but I do know that it's pretty widely used pretty much anywhere you can imagine.
Cool.
Yeah, there are some large Chinese companies that use Spring as well. And I know of a lot of companies that use Spring. They just aren't paying customers to Pivotal, so there's not a lot of PR that goes with that. So, but it's in loose use in a lot of places.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. Yeah, there's it's like for everyone you see, there's probably 49 that are using it that you don't know about because of it's open source, right? Until you get that pull request with 40,000 lines from some company that you never knew existed, right?
Exactly.
So let's say someone is fresh out of college, they want to build their first kind of cool website, and they want to use Spring. They might know Java, but I've never heard of Spring other than this podcast. How would you recommend them to get started? Like, what's sort of the hello world of Spring?
Well, one thing that I think we do a really nice job with is creating some really good bite-sized getting started guides, as well as some more in-depth guides. And if you go to spring.io/guides, I believe it is, I'll verify that, and we can link to that in the show notes. But we have a lot of bite-sized use cases that someone can say, well, gosh, how do I create a REST API? How do I work with Redis? How do I work with Kafka? How do I maybe plug into a NoSQL data store behind the scenes using Spring Data? And we have these kind of bite-sized guides that step you through that, typically using Spring Boot, because Spring Boot makes all of this much more easily consumable and approachable. So the website you typically start with to create an empty shell project based on dependencies you specify is the Spring Initializer site, which is start.spring.io, which gets you, doesn't generate any code, but it will create a shell project that gives you kind of a running start at your application. And then, of course, the Getting Started guides give you that kind of walk alongside you holding your hand and get you started with it. And then, of course, we have a really good Spring Central Twitter account, as well as a good YouTube channel, which give you a lot of very short as well as very in-depth video guides to kind of get you up and running and started. And, of course, past that, we're on Getter, we're on Twitter, we're everywhere you might want to reach out, and we encourage that from the community because sometimes someone will come up with a question that we've perhaps never thought of, or perhaps it's not a typical use case, but it's something we want to consider. Or they may, again, as you said, ping us with a pull request. And I always tell people, get the bits, play with the bits, get the code, play with the code, look through the code. And if you see something we're missing, let us know. And if you maybe want to submit a pull request, do that as well. Because it's all out there. That's kind of how you get up to speed and running and do useful things is to start working with it. So we try to make that easy as well.
Cool. That makes sense. That sounds great. We'll definitely include those links on the show notes. So if you're listening and you want to check out those guides, probably the best way would be to click on the show notes link in the podcast notes, and then we'll have links over there. I know that Apache has the Apache sort of incubator, right, for projects that are kind of not really ready for prime time or not really ready for enterprise. So if you could spill the beans, what's a sort of a amazing kind of Spring project that's in incubation right now that people can really look forward to?
I don't know that there's much that's under wraps. A lot of what we plan on implementing this year, we talked about at Spring One platform, which is our Spring and Cloud Foundry conference that happens once a year. And so a lot of things were talked about then, and the roadmap was given generally. But some of the things that are ongoing, Spring 5, which is well underway, has a number of stories. It will be a baseline of Java 8, which is a fairly large shift from the 6, 7, and 8 support in the older lines. And then Mark alluded to it a little bit before, but there's a reactive story. So allowing access to resources in a non-blocking manner that will be throughout Spring Framework. Their Spring Boot version 2 will build upon that and have there's a new, if you've worked with Spring MVC before, you have the annotation-based way of doing web services, if you've seen that, but there will also be a functional way of doing web services. So some of the people that may have experience in another functional language that is used to that, especially with Java 8, they'll be able to have a similar experience while having all of the same history and stability that Spring Framework gives you.
Cool. That's awesome. Yeah, I really love I've used reactive programming. I've used Angular before on JavaScript side. I've seen React. There's I think a Java RX or something like that, but I haven't actually
Java.
RX Java. That's right. I haven't actually used it, but I love the idea. It's kind of like, an Excel spreadsheet with a bunch of formulas, and when you change the numbers, everything else just magically is computed, right? So there's a lot of appeal to that.
Yeah, the original reactive extensions were from Microsoft, and the folks at Netflix decided they wanted something similar, but they were heavy JVM users, so they created RX Java, and now there are a number of reactive implementations in various languages, and so yeah, it's in fact there's a reactive streams project which is an interoperability interfaces between some of these projects. So, for example, if you have an RX Java observable, but you want to go to a reactor Flux, which those don't matter, but there are interfaces that they both implement that you can get some compatibility between them.
Cool. That's awesome. Besides Spring Framework, what other things do you want kind of listeners to check out? And we mentioned Cloud Foundry. That's definitely a good one to check out. Are there any other things that Pivotal is working on, or just things where you kind of have this amazing tool or library or language and you feel like it is neglected, like an unsung hero that you'd want to bring up?
Well, I'll jump in here again. It's kind of hard for me to choose favorites. You always hear that from a parent, I guess. But although I'm not really the father of any of this, I just am one of the many, many, many beneficiaries, really, and ardent fans, so to speak. But you have so many things in the Spring Framework in general, and the Spring portfolio that were developed to solve a real need. They're meant to be workhorses, not racehorses in a lot of ways. In terms of, I keep going back to Spring Data, and I think Spencer's mentioned that too. It's not overly sexy. It's not necessarily something that you'd really get excited about using per se. It's just that it works so well that you find yourself coming back to it over and over for projects. And I see a lot of our portfolio as solving really strong burning needs, but there's not a lot of sizzle there. It just fills a gap so well. The one thing that I'm kind of excited about is that reactive story, because for a long time, I think the Java ecosystem has kind of taken it on the chin on the reactive side of things. And of course, RX Java being a very notable exception in that regard. But with Project Reactor, we're actually implementing reactive capabilities throughout all of the Spring Framework, all the way from the lowest tier, storing the data, all the way up through to a web client. So that is it's a Herculean task, and we're implementing that in parallel with the imperative model that we already have in place that's kind of battle tested for well over a decade, significantly over a decade. And we're implementing those in parallel so that people can bring their institutional knowledge, their existing knowledge and have it immediately apply, and to not have to convert everything over to where it's an all or nothing. So that kind of excites me because I can use the tool that makes sense when it makes sense to use it. And that's all any of us want, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I know there have been, I mean, every time, a framework or a language does something that isn't backwards compatible, it's always extremely painful. I mean, we still can't just as a community get beyond Python 2. Like, it's still hard to get everyone on Python 3. It's been I don't know exactly how long, but it's got to be at least 5 years, if not longer. And the same with Angular. I mean, Angular went to 2.0 and it's not backwards compatible. And it's very hard to migrate the whole community over.
Yeah, and you don't want to lose that expertise that you've developed as a developer. You don't want to feel like, well, that's great, but everything I've done up to this point, just throw it away because everything changed out from under me overnight. You want to take advantage of all the neat new stuff, but you don't want to feel like you have to throw away all that you've learned and the lessons and the battles you've won to get there. And that's what we hope to accomplish by providing kind of the best of both worlds in parallel packaging. So
cool. Well, a couple of questions about Pivotal before we kind of wrap up. Where's Pivotal located? Are you guys hiring? And whether you're hiring or not, what's the best thing about working at Pivotal? If you're not hiring, you can just make everyone really jealous. If you are hiring, it could be a selling point.
We are hiring, and I know we're hiring specifically for the spring team that I know of. So we are hiring. Pivotal came from different projects that had been acquired by EMC and VMware, and so they spun those software projects out into Pivotal. So Pivotal itself is only 3 or 4 years old, but the projects that are in them are older than that. I believe headquarters in Silicon Valley, with offices all over the world, really. One of the parts of Pivotal is a consulting arm. They have a different style of teaching, and I saw this at Ford. Rather than just having a class, a week boot camp where they come in and show you their way of doing things, the way they like to do things is pair with the company and show them, build something real with them and show them their processes and things, how they do that. So that's one of the things that Pivotal does as well. Cool.
Sounds good. Great. Thank you so much for your time. This is super interesting. I've definitely used a lot of the Spring framework in the past, so thank you for building it as well. I've definitely it's made a lot of projects I've built easier. Patrick, do you have anything burning? I feel like
I think that was awesome. You did a great job. Thank you, everyone, for being on.
Well, thanks for having us, and thanks to the Spring community for being an awesome community and working with us, and thanks for the pull requests.
All right, we'll keep them coming.
Great.
The intro music is Axo by Binar Pilot. Programming Throwdown is distributed under a Creative Commons Attribution Share-alike 2.0 license. You're free to share, copy, distribute, transmit the work, to remix, adapt the work, but you must provide attribution to Patrick and I, and share alike in kind.